Yeah.
Well, he went down and looked, so he
No,
called.
well, I think he looked. He scanned him with the binoculars,
Oh,
but Chris told him about
yeah.
it. Hey, Bill. We'll just go ahead and get started if that's okay.
All set.
You ready?
Okay.
Okay. Um, hey, it's November 13, 2021, 2021. Just getting the date down. And how old are you today, Bill?
How old am I today?
Yeah,
90 plus.
90 plus. What year were you born?
6/4/1931.
Okay. So we wanted to kind of get some of your remembrances of your early career and um, other things that you've been through in 90 plus years. What are some of your early remembrances that you enjoy telling about?
I remember right across down here at where Woodbrook is now. That was my grandfather's place. He had 150 acres, and where we are now is part of it too.
Okay, we're up here at the end of Ostrander Road.
Yeah, up the end of Ostrander Road, and then right across from where his house was on the other side, he gave my parents 5 acres wedding present. And then Dad was out of the service, and he was working down at Long Bell, and they just had built it not too long ago. I think they started building it in 1932. And anyhow, then they sold a place down there, and he built a house on the 5 acres across from where my grandfather's up Ostrander here, and he built it. It was a 2-story house and whatnot, and when he built it, he wired it for electricity. There was no electricity up here then, but he wired it, and then he had he built a shop out behind the house, and he had a Briggs and Stratton motor in there and a car generator, and you could buy 12-volt light bulbs, but they run off a 12-volt battery, but they're the same as the light bulbs you have today, only they were smaller. I mean, less power to run them.
Sure.
And then the generator he used the motor he used to run was a car generator, generator, what do you want to call it, for electricity back then, and it was 6 volt at that time. They didn't, and he had a couple batteries in the house there, and the only time we couldn't stay up when it got dark, we had to go to bed because we couldn't. The lights went. But during the daytime, if it was dark, we got to use the lights a little bit. And when they'd run the little engine that he had to run the generators had just a small tank, and they didn't have to go. They filled it up, started it, and let it run. And when it quit,
that was it. That was the end of the night.
You know, and then right up above the hill, over here from the house there, is about a quarter of a mile up the hill. There was a 1-room schoolhouse up there, and they had school in there up till when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
Well, then they closed it when I turned 6, so we had to ride the bus. They had the school bus come up, and I had to ride the bus into the Washington School there in North Kelso, where we went to. I went to the first grade of school there, and the bus that they had at the time was an old city bus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the bus could make it up the hill empty, and up above us here, and there was about a dozen kids up above here, around here. There was up past us here, from where we're living now, was a sawmill back there, and it had about 6 families up there with kids. And they'd bring them down Plank Road down to where the bus would pick them up. But the bus couldn't get up the bottom, just the bottom of the hill. It couldn't get up the hill with all the kids in it because it was a city bus and didn't have the rest. And we had to walk home up the hill. For about 6 weeks, we had to walk up before they could get a gear set up to put in that bus so it could make it up the hill with all us kids in it.
Wow.
But it could make it up empty, but it couldn't make it with us kids in it.
Was it about a mile walk up the hill, something like that?
Yeah, it's clear down to the bottom of the hill. They just get up underneath the trestle there where you live, right there, just there, and that's it. They turned around right there because they couldn't get up the hill. And then that's another thing. It was a 1-lane road and it had turnouts here and there. And if you met there was log trucks coming down and whatnot, and when you met a truck, you took the first turnout, or if nothing, you back down the car or the bus or something back down to a turnout, so that and then let the truck go by.
Yeah.
And at that time, the log truck brakes weren't so fancy either. They
Took a while to
took
actually.
a while to stop, and then they come down slow, and all the guys that was driving up here was good, good drive, good. There was no accidents. That's some words once in a while, but
Sure.
and then when I was a kid, we got 3 feet of snow up here every winter.
Really, every winter.
Every winter you got 3 feet of snow, and that was that way till I was about 12. I was 12 years old when we moved into town. Because in the meantime, Dad built some sailboats, and he built toys for us kids, and wagons and coasters and stuff, and he built. He had a wood lathe in his shop and all that, and he built toy trains and wood. I got some out here at the stove that he built, and I had one. My brother Fred had one, and my sister Ruth, and the numbers of the on the trains for the like they have in trains numbers on it,
Mm-hmm.
was how many letters was in your name.
Oh,
That's
cool.
what the letters was in and we played with them, and then when I was just a little fella, about 2 years old, he built me a rocker horse. It's 2 plywood horses, and they're about say 15, 16 inches apart. The horses are, and got the ears stuck up, and when you're rocking the horses, you could hang on to the ears and it rock on it, and we had to put a few repairs in it because all my kids got to use it,
Mm-hmm.
and some of my brother Fred's kids got to use it, and just whoever from my sister Ruth's kids got to use it, and then as it going up, some of my children's used it, and then their kids have all used it, and the last one to use it was the youngest one of all of us. That's Mitch is the youngest one, and he his boy got to use it.
Morgan and Taylor.
Yeah.
Yep. Taylor.
That's the one that was up there that's it at the lake there.
Yeah.
And Mom when Dad made the toy for us kids, Mom painted it.
That's cool.
And whichever color we liked the best, that's what she, and when she painted a lot of the toys she made. But this, we had no say with her. She painted the horse's gray with a black mane and ears, and it had a tail on plywood. And when we were small, and you could be somebody sitting in it rocking in it, and there was a place where someone to step on behind, hang on to it, and rock too. and we had a lot of fun with it. That thing's got a lot of miles on it.
Yeah.
And
Bill, I remember you mentioning that you didn't have a regular refrigerator up on Ostrander where you
no,
lived,
we
did you?
didn't have a refrigerator. We had we had a cow, and on the back and this time Dad was working at the he left the mill when he moved up and he was working for the state, and it was connected with the WPA and all that stuff, and they got from the state they got food, canned food and other food, and then they also had in Longview they had two big buildings there, and they had women in there with sewing machines, and they made work clothes for people and dresses for women, for kids, and all that stuff, and they had a store in West Kelso, and the people would come in there, and they had they had, I think, 4 people working in the store there, and they had all kinds of vegetables. They'd get big crates of oranges in and whatnot, and they had all kinds of canned vegetables and stuff, and people could come in and get stuff, and then once a month Dad had to make a trip. He'd rent a truck, big flatbed truck. I can't even remember. My memory don't quite work for the Burchett. Old man Burchett was the one that had the truck, and then he had some grandsons that I went to school with and stuff, but anyway, we'd go down to Cathlamet and then they'd go out onto the island out there, and they there's a bunch of people there, and had their cards and stuff, and they'd get food and clothes and stuff and they did quite a thing. And then they had the 3 C's, the guys come working out here in the wood, and a lot of those fellows that come out here to work in the woods turned around and end up to be big loggers.
Really?
In fact, I haul logs for some of them.
The Civilian Conservation Corps.
Yeah. They on their own, turned
Yeah.
out to be up the Lewis River and all around, big loggers, and when they it was kept me busy. I did quite a bit of log hauling and trucking for a lot of those fellows.
In years later after.
And years
you got out
later,
of high school.
years later,
Tell us about that. What'd you do for a refrigerator at your home?
Well,
What did your dad and mom do?
we had on the back porch. Dad put a big back porch out there, and he had 2 of them big orange crates up there, and it's in the middle of the orange crate it had a partition, Well, they'd put some 2x4s, stand them up, so he had 2 shelves there in a box, and then they had took old gunny sacks and hang them around it, and they'd put a coffee can up there and put a nail hole in it and fill it full of water, and that gunny sack would be wet, cool, and the cow we had put cool, and man, you could stick your in where the cream was in there, and just stick a spoon and it'd just be heaped up with cream.
Wow.
Oh, it was and then we didn't at that time. We had dug a well there, and 44 feet deep the well was. There's water, and Mom had a big aluminum kettle that was about 18 inches across, and it had a big handle, and she'd tie a rope on that, and she could lower that down in the well with jello in it, until you could just see the kettle hit the bottom of the kettle, it hit the water. You could see the water ripple, and she'd leave it down there for a couple hours and haul it out, and we had Jello.
That's so cool.
It would, yeah.
Just cold enough to make it.
Yeah, it was cold enough down there, and it would make Jello. And then, of course, yeah, that cow had real rich cream, and it was, she'd have whipped cream on it, whatnot. And so we had a lot of Jello for dessert, plus cakes.
Mm-hmm.
And she would make for me, when my birthdays come along, I got a 7-layer cake.
Wow.
Boy, it was stacked up like that, and of course, then we all had Jello. You know, there's no ice cream but Jello with whipped cream on top of it. And this one time, our grandparents lived across the road, and on their place they had a 1-cylinder electric motor, and my grandmother had a electric wash machine, and they had so you'd crank it like that, and then it would start, and it would 1 cylinder, it would go boom, pop, and then boom, 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 then boom, it hit. And if you happen to be walking by there with exhaust come out, it'd blow the hat right off your head.
Really?
So you learned that you walked around, because they had a spring that was about over a quarter of a mile away, and the pipe, and they'd start running water way early, so they had enough water, and Mom would go over and they'd wash there for a while, and then they'd have to hang the clothes out on the clothesline, and they had an outhouse. We had an outhouse. We had it on, and then when for us kids, they had a potty chair there and a thing in there, and then I was the one that ended up with, they had to go empty it every morning.
Oh, really?
Dump it out, and we had that, and then when I was about 10 years old, we got, they brought power up here. So all Dad had to do was change the light bulbs and put the light bulbs in, because the house was all wired, and my grandparents were the same way over there, and they didn't have to use that old light plan. But this one time, I was sitting out there swinging on a chair, and I looked up, and the roof of my grandfather's had a big 2-story house, and I looked up, and it was roof was on fire. So I went and got, I talked to my grandmother, told me the roof's on fire, so they got it. And my grandfather said they were so glad that it was worst day that fire come, because he said they'd have never got enough water running, took too long to run enough water, but they could get up in there and put the fire out. And my grandfather was a carpenter by trade anyhow, and it didn't take him long to fix the roof and all that stuff. And then another thing, that when we lived up there, every year the cow would have to have a young one to get fresh for milk, and of course they butcher the calf to eat. Well, us kids got, you're eating brownie, we're eating brownie, and didn't like it. So Dad had some friends that had the same, so they'd take Brownie, or Betty Anna Marie, Susanna, Joel Brown Pepper was the names, they had all kinds of names like that. Each one of us kids got the name, and sister Fred, brother Fred, and sister, and anyhow, they trade with somebody else, so we wasn't eating our pet.
Sure.
And then somebody you knew.
And then my sister Ruth got what they called pink disease. And she's just a couple of year and a half or 2 years younger than I am, but anyhow, she got this pink disease, and they tried everything. In fact, her grandfather wouldn't even come over and see her, because she was just looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it.
Really?
And some people down at the bottom of the hill there, clear down at the bottom of Ostrander there, right across from the old Ostrander mill it used to be, had goats. And Dad made a deal with them, and every when he'd come home from work, there'd be a gallon of milk sitting out there on the fence post for him, and he'd pick it up and bring it up, and Ruth is alive today, but I talked to her the other day, and she said she wasn't feeling too good, and I said, maybe you better go back and get you some goat's milk. And she said, I looked around and I know like where I can go get it.
There you go.
And so she did.
That's awesome.
But we had it was quite a time, and then our grandparents, when World War II come, they rented a ranch, a place, and they went to Vancouver and worked at the Kaiser's shipyards. And so Dad got Mom a wash machine with a gas engine on it. And Mom had she'd flood it every time, she'd crank, foot pedal on it to start it. And, she'd cuss that thing, and Dad'd come home and what's the matter with it? And he'd go out and just stomp on it and it'd take right off. She didn't really like that big machine.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
What do you remember from your school days back then?
What?
What do you remember from your school days?
Oh, well, in the school days, when we rode the bus there west until we moved into town. When we moved into town, I was 12 years old, and we moved into West Kelso. But in the meantime, Dr. Davis has had a son that was in the Sea Scouts, not the Boy Scouts, but the Sea Scouts, and they needed a leader, and so Dr. Davis talked Dad into becoming a Sea Scout skipper for the skips, and then there was another adult in that, but he was younger, DeLoss Wilma. Was a first mate in it, and then there was a bunch of the boys that went to school, and he had to be 12 years older than in order to be a senior, and they go on up to some of them was in their teens. In fact, some of them were in college, still Sea Scout, and they had a boat and a place on the river down there, and so we pulled our boat down and docked it right there, the same place where the Sea Scout place was in there, and it was right above the Indians, the Wannasees there, where the tribe had a place there, and then anyhow, the Cowlitz Indian, Cowlitz Sea Scout ship and whatnot. These guys all grew up and we didn't get any more. Well, so that we didn't have any Sea Scouts for a while. And then I was in the Boy Scouts, and then Dad became a Boy Scout master, Boy Scouts, and we had a bunch of kids in West Kelso there, and some Kelso in the Boy Scouts. And then when I grew up old enough to be a Sea Scout, and some of the others, they formed a Sea Scout ship there, and it was called a Wannasie, and I was in that, and there was a whole bunch of kids in West Kelso and around there that was joined this one, and then my brother Fred was complaining about we were Scouts and he didn't have nothing, and he was too young to be a Boy Scout, so Dad ended up being a Cub Master. And he had a Cub troop there. I mean, there was a bunch of them there, and the Moose Lodge and had them off, and they ended up being the sponsor for us. And then so we had a Sea Scout chip, and he was a Sea Scout and a Boy Scout a Scout Master, and then he was also a Cub Master. And boy, I mean, there was a lot of people in that, and kids in it. And then my sister Ruth started squawking, so Mom ended up with instead of the Sea Scouts, the girls were Mariners, and so she had a Marinership group, and the Mariners used the same boat and stuff that the Sea Scouts used and whatnot, and that went on for quite a few years. And on the Boy Scouts, there's Sand Island down at the mouth of the Cowlitz, and out there in the Columbia, and he'd take the Boy Scouts down, and down at the mouth of the Cowlitz there was always a lot of driftwood and stuff there, and the Boy Scouts had to make them a driftwood raft and paddle across to the island. And of course there was the Sea Scouts was there in their boat and stuff, and then there was always several other boats around there of abandoned boats, and some of them was from the Moose Lodge too, would come down and kind of escort the boys in the raft they'd built, tie it together and paddle across to the island, and then we'd spend a weekend on the island there. And there was always a bunch of parents, and down at just across from there, Longview Fiber had a dock out there with the boat that Elsinore would come across the river and bring. A lot of guys who lived in Rainier worked at Fiber, so this boat would bring them across the morning and then pick them back. And then it also the ones that was worked down at Long Bell and Weyerhaeuser, it was instead of them driving over, and I could just get on the boat and go there, and it was pretty good. Anyhow, we had quite a time, but they'd come down, and the people would, and a lot of parents would come out, and they always had lots of grown-up peoples to escort around with the boys anytime we did anything like that. And then when there was camping, and then when the Mariners came and camped and whatnot, there was a lot of mothers was there. Boy, sometimes between all the parents and the in-law, there was almost more than the scouts that were there, you know. But they had a good time for it. And then on Sunday morning, Dad could he'd make a big dinner, and we'd have to dig a hole down in the ground, fill it full of rocks, and then they'd get a big bunch of food all put together in wet blankets and stuff, put it down there and underneath, and have it steam and cook it. And then on Sunday morning, and we'd have about a half-hour church thing, you know, sing the Lord, and then I'll talk to him, and then they dig, and I had that wire down around it, and you could pull it up out of there and take it over and put it on the table. It was always big enough for most. And then there was also bread and butter and all other stuff there. But they had
big stew pot. Was it a big stew pot?
Big pots, yeah, of dinner and never had nothing left over, I can tell you that for sure.
Everything's gone.
All of them, all of them, and then they always had enough there for the parents, and everybody was there to eat. One time they had, like you want to call it, the Moose Lodge had some guys that was helping sponsor us, and they'd all be there to come around there. My grandfather was there, and see how things keep an eye on stuff all the time. And he cooked a meal of that stuff for them guys. And man, they just lapped that up like it was. They thought that was pretty good stuff. They thought them boys ate pretty good, and they're all of them down there. And a lot of the, when the girls would come, a lot of the women's they'd be over learning how to fix that stuff, what he fixed for them and stuff for them, and learning.
Did you say that sometimes there'd be a football game breakout over the weekend?
Oh yeah, I got some pictures. Well, in between Sand Island and the other island, there was a kind of a mud flat in there, and the older boys, we'd have a football game in there, and lots of times you'd be running almost knee deep in mud, you know.
Wow.
And,
Did you say you had to wait till the tide was just right?
yeah, wait till tide was just right, and lots of times you didn't have to worry about the tide. It was, you know, there's enough mud in there, but then as it kind of washed down, it wasn't bad. We got some photographs of some of those.
How deep was the mud when you were playing football?
Well, sometimes it was knee deep, and sometimes it was only about ankle deep. But
Might be a good opportunity to check out some of those pictures if we can find them.
Okay, so we pause it?
Yeah, let's do it. And it's a good time to